Alright, so today we're picking up with the powers of Congress and what Congress is able to do. Now, a lot of this is based on how people interpret or view the Constitution. So there's two different types of construction on the Constitution. There is the strict construction versus the liberal construction. And strict construction was a movement that was initially led by Thomas Jefferson. And basically what it says is that if the Constitution doesn't say it, it shouldn't happen. If it's not in writing, and if it's not in black and white in the writing, it's a very literal interpretation of the Constitution that if it doesn't say it, government shouldn't have that power, or whatever, the state government, whatever government shouldn't have this power. So it's a very, very literal interpretation. Now, under a strict construction, the states have more power, that the states have more power to do more. Then you have a liberal construction, and a liberal construction was a movement that was led by initially Alexander Hamilton. And this is a much more broad interpretation of the Constitution. Basically says you can read between the lines, you can add in power, there's that blank space, the gray space that needs to be filled in, and so we're going to be able to do that with this broad interpretation of the Constitution. And with a broad interpretation or a broad construction of the Constitution, the federal government has more power than the states. So it really depends on how the court system, how the executive branch, how the legislative branch kind of all view how the Constitution should be interpreted. So with that, we're going to be looking at the different types of powers that are held by Congress. And the first are expressed powers. And we've talked about some of this stuff already, but now we're going to get a little bit more in depth into it. So expressed powers are powers that are literal powers. You can find them in the writing. And there's 27 powers that are expressed powers that are given to Congress. Some of them, and we're not going to go into all 27, we're just going to go into a few of them, but some of them include things like the power to tax, which is an expressed power. And so there's different kinds of taxes. You have a direct tax, which is a direct tax is one that must be paid by the person on whom it is imposed. So like an income tax. You make an income, you get taxed for that income. So you are the one paying the tax. Another type of tax is an indirect tax. And an indirect tax is one that is first paid by one person, and then the cost of that tax is passed on to another person. So a great example of that would be excise taxes. And excise taxes would be like taxes on cigarette or taxes on your gasoline. For example, like you don't pay taxes on gasoline because the tax is already included in there. It's already been paid by the gas company, and they pass that cost on to you as the purchaser of that gasoline. Same thing for cigarettes, that there's already a tax incurred into that. The next is the power to borrow, and there's no limit on how much the government can borrow or how much Congress can borrow. There's no congressional limit. I'm sure they would like to put one occasionally, but they don't, or they haven't yet. And so because of that, we have gotten into this trend of deficit spending. And so this is where you spend more money than you actually are making. And so this has been a trend for decades, and today we are seeing kind of the accumulation of that. And so our deficit is now in the trillions of dollars. It'd be nice to have a balanced budget, but it's going to be a very long haul, and we're going to have some major changes to our economic policy in order to see that happen. And the next is a commerce power, and the commerce power is the power to regulate interstate and foreign trade. Now, it's not without limitations. There are some limitations to that. The first is that Congress is forbidden to tax exports. Anything that we're sending out of our country, Congress cannot tax. The second limitation is that they cannot favor one state over another. So they can't favor that New Jersey is going to get all the imports and exports into there. The third is that they cannot tax ships from other states. So if a ship from Florida docks in New York, they can't tax it because it's not an it's not an import because it's within our own country. And the fourth had to do with the slave trade, which no longer exists, so it's not really an important part. But that's one of the limitations that was set on Congress in the Constitution. The next power is the currency power, and this is the power to coin money and to regulate its value. Prior to the Constitution, each state had their own currency, which made things very confusing and also caused a lot of bad feelings between states because of inflation that was placed or exchange rates that were placed on their currency. So now the national government has that power, so that settles a lot of that problem. The next power is the bankruptcy power, and bankruptcy is the legal proceeding in which the bankrupt person's assets are distributed among those to whom they owe a debt. So basically, the bankruptcy power deals with legal responsibility, that if you acquire debt, you have to pay back those that you owe money to. So that's part and parcel with that. The next power are the foreign relations and war powers. The foreign relations power, basically, states have no standing in international law because the states don't have the ability to make treaties and that kind of stuff. And Congress is not allowed to take part in foreign relations either. That is something that is left to the executive branch. The executive branch deals with foreign relations, and Congress does things like approving the treaties. They don't actually negotiate them. In terms of war powers, 8 of the expressed powers deal specifically with war and defense. And so things like only Congress can declare war, and only Congress is able to raise and support our armed forces, our military. So obviously it was a major concern that was on the minds of our founding fathers. The next power is a postal power. It establishes our postal offices, our post offices, and it helps to prevent fraud, mail fraud, and mail theft and that kind of stuff. And so it is a federal crime to rob a post office or to commit mail fraud or to obstruct the mail service because it is a federal power. So if you rob the post office, you're going to serve some major time in jail because it's a federal crime and a state crime and a local crime. So you're going to be serving a lot of time in a jail cell, as opposed to if you just rob the local nickel and dime store. You're not going to serve quite as much time because it's not a federal crime. The next power is copyright and patents. And a copyright is the right of an author to reproduce, publish, and sell their work. And so copyright applies to things like books and magazines, music lyrics, music compositions, plays, paintings, cartoons, movies, maps, all kinds of stuff. So it applies to pretty much everything. If you create an idea, an original idea, you own the copyright, or you have to apply for it, but you get the copyright to it. The second is the patent, and a patent is the right of a person to manufacture, use, or sell an invention. And so this could be a machine, it could be a tool, it could be an idea, it could be an improvement on a formula or something along that line. But again, it's something that you have to apply for in order to get. And the next are weights and measures. And this power is going to allow the government to fix the standards throughout the U.S. And here in the U.S. we use the English system, and we also use the metric system. And so basically what this weights and measures power does is it makes sure that a pound in Iowa is the same as a pound in Florida or a pound in Alaska, so that there's no discrepancy in that. The next power is the power over territories, and we have a lot of territories. We have like the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, Guam, the Virgin Islands. That also includes our military installations throughout the world. It includes our prison facilities. It includes forest preserves. So there's a lot of different places that are territories that are governed by Congress. So those are some of the expressed powers. The next type of powers that Congress has are the implied powers, and the implied powers are those that you can, it's that gray area. So it's a much more liberal construction so the express powers are the strict construction, and implied powers tend to be the liberal construction of the Constitution. And these implied powers come from the necessary and proper clause. It's often nicknamed the elastic clause because it's stretched in order for us to interpret the written word of the Constitution, so we can stretch those powers, those expressed powers, to include more things. Today, necessary and proper tends to translate into convenient and useful, so they stretch it when they need it. But it's oftentimes used to get things done, like establishing banks or highway systems or preventing racial discrimination. There's all kinds of things that implied powers are used for. The next set are non-legislative powers. There are some powers that Congress has that are not really a part of the legislative branch. So, things like this can include constitutional amendments, changing the Constitution. That power starts with Congress. It does need to be proposed by 2/3 vote in both houses of Congress. So, getting that constitutional amendment process started is a power of Congress. It doesn't start anywhere else. It has to start with Congress. The second is that they do have some electoral duties. When it comes to elections, the House of Representatives may actually be the deciding factor in who becomes president. If no candidate receives a majority of electoral votes, and they have to have a majority, which is 271 right now, so if they don't get 271 electoral votes, then it goes to the House, and the House, each state gets each state is going to get a vote, and so you have, instead of 100 senators, 435, so 535. Out of 530, I think there's 538 because District of Columbia and Puerto Rico get one too. But out of 538 electoral votes out there, you have to get a majority, which is 271. But when it goes to the House, it's by state. So there's 50 states. You got to get a majority. You need 35 states to agree to you being the president. So it's a little complicated, but that's a power that they could get. It's never been used before because we've never had a tie in the Electoral College, but it's a possibility that it could be the House that's making that determination. The third kind of power that they have is the power of impeachment. So if it mostly applies to the president and the vice president, but it also can apply to like Supreme Court justices or federal judges or other places too, cabinet members. They can be impeached, they can be removed. And so the power of impeachment, the House has the ability to bring the charges, so they're the ones that are formally accusing the person of the crime. And the Senate has the ability to judge the case. So they listen to both sides, they listen to the arguments, they hold the trial basically. So the Senate has the ability to do that. The last type of powers are kind of some executive kind of powers. Any appointments that are made by the president have to be confirmed by the Senate. So if the president appoints a cabinet member or he appoints a Supreme Court justice, it has to be confirmed by the Senate before they can take their job. Same thing applies to treaties. Any treaties that are made by the president have to be accepted by the Senate first. So that is a way that they have some executive type powers as a part of the legislative branch. So those are the powers of Congress. And then next time we're going to be looking at Congress in action and what they actually do when they get to work.